we will be recording this presentation, and members of APRA Maryland do have access to all of our recording. So Jessica Balsam and Kelly Riutta have agreed to come to us all the way from the University of Washington, where I was going to say it's completely beautiful, but they told me it's really stormy today. So they've done a really great job of faking some of the lighting in their room. 'Cause it looks really sunny where they are. But anyways, Jessica is the Senior Director of Prospect Development at the University of Washington. She is the past president of APRA Northwest and the recipient of the APRA Professional of the Year Award in 2016. Her 15 years in nonprofits have included positions in the arts, in smaller high ed organizations, and as a board member for several nonprofits. We also have Kelly, the Director of Prospect Research, also at the University of Washington. She has over 20 years of experience working with nonprofits, both big and small, as an administrator, librarian, and information and fundraising professional. She's also served in a variety of leadership roles for APRA, most recently as the chair of APRA's Education and Professional Development Committees. So welcome, Kelly and Jessica, and thank you again for sharing your experiences and what you've learned. And I'm going to send it over to you in a second. I will let everyone know that we're going to be using the chat room today. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in. There'll be a couple times where we can ask questions. While we go, I'll be sending them over to our speakers, and then we'll have time at the end as well for additional questions if we don't get to your questions during the presentation. So feel free to use that chat room. And welcome, Jessica and Kelly.
Thank you, Joanna. I am really excited to be here today. I know Kelly feels the same. I'm gonna share my screen and you all will tell me whether it looks good. Everyone sees that? Okay.
Looks good.
All right. Well, good morning from the West Coast. It's super stormy here, as Joanna was saying. Kind of exciting. I just want to take a second as we begin to give a huge shout out to Joanna and Teresa and the whole APRA Maryland board, because not every APRA chapter is as great as them. And Kelly and I met before we worked together on the APRA Northwest board. So we both have lots of good feelings about APRA chapters and all that they do for our profession. So thank you guys so much. And, you know, thank a board member, thank a chapter committee board member, because they do a lot of work. You may hear my kids. I'm here with, in my living room with my kids doing homeschool, and it's just the way of the pandemic right now. So just a heads up for that. And I also want to say too, that Kelly and I have both had multiple monitors going on. So I hope it doesn't weird you out if we're looking around at our notes or our slides or anything like that. I'm excited to just introduce our topic today. We're doing Beyond Capacity, Wrangling Ratings for Fundraising Success. We thought for a minute when you put out the kind of mailer, the email with the cowboy on it, that maybe you do that because we're on the West Coast and like we're super cowboy. But then we remember that we put the word wrangling in our title, and it's true. Like, we're talking today about wrangling. It's a messy process with ratings and scores, and we definitely don't have all the answers, but we're here to talk about some of the things that we've done. I gave a version of this presentation last summer in Phoenix at APRA, and I want to say I hope that if you saw that presentation, if you're here today, it's a lot different because Kelly has made it way better. Like Joanna said, I'm the Director of Prospect Development, and Kelly is the Director of Research at University of Washington. I'll let her introduce herself and say hi as well.
Yeah, I'll just add, I guess really nothing. Joanna really covered it, so thanks. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Well, we'll talk a little bit about University of Washington just to set the stage. We just finished up our 10-year campaign, and it ended up being $6.2 billion campaign. We just released the numbers last week. So huge campaign, long time, So everything we have done in the last decade has been campaign. So if you hear us talk about campaign, that's why. It started 6 months after I arrived. Kelly was already at UW. So huge, weird landscape for us to be in right now. Good timing, really, with the pandemic that we ended our campaign. But it's funny to think about not being in a campaign right now. We have about 170 frontline fundraisers in major gifts at University of Washington, and 650 people in advancement. That includes marketing communications. Kelly and I have 15 people total on prospect development. That includes prospect management and prospect research. We have a separate department that does our analytics, but we work really closely with them, of course. Anything to add there, Kelly? So let's start with our central premise here. We have treated ratings like king for a long time. I know you're all super impressed with my word art skills here. I have taken the king and put a little crown on him, given him a blingy necklace. And there's a good reason for that. Ratings are really useful, right? And it wasn't that long ago that a lot of our shops didn't even have ratings on every prospect in our CRMs. So that was a huge step for our profession to say, like, you know what, we have room to store it. We have the ability to buy these ratings. We have the ability to make ratings more quickly because we have better access to data. And so we're going to just flood our CRMs with ratings. And it's great, right? Because it helps us figure out who to prioritize for our fundraisers. But I'm going to just posit two problems that we've started to run into. One is that we're using ratings as a single piece of information too often. Like, we're sending out lists, and we are guilty of this too, with names and ratings. And we're saying, here's your best prospects. And we're not giving additional context because things are moving fast, or because, we trust our ratings, because of course we do. But that means we're missing the opportunity to provide valuable context for our fundraisers. And I think the second problem, so the first problem is we're using them as a single piece of information too often. And number two is we are working too hard on them, right? We are doing, I think, Herculean things to make them more accurate. And at some point, there's diminishing returns on that work. So Kelly and I aren't going to pretend that we've solved these problems at all, but we're going to talk a little bit today about how we've mitigated this a bit. I think one of the reasons, there's lots of reasons why they shouldn't be a single source of truth, but one of the big things that we struggle with here in Seattle is that real estate is often the only source of information for a rating, because it's publicly available information on almost every person in the US that owns property or home. And we have crazy real estate situation going on in Seattle, especially since 2008. But even before then, as we've been on the upswing, our home prices have just gone crazy. And so then it becomes hard to say, how do we rate this person based on their real estate if we know it is inflated, right? Secondly, we have a major issue with, this is a huge problem. So I'm like, how do I state this simply? Home ownership and property ownership among Black, Indigenous, people of color in this country has traditionally been limited by redlining and discrimination in mortgage lending. And it's been going on for so long that there's a huge home ownership gap, right? And not only is there a huge home ownership gap between white people and people of color, but there's also this issue that just keeps coming up where a neighborhood's assessment values are also tied to the race of the people living in the neighborhood. So there are so many ways that insidious systemic racism is stopping us from finding the high net worth and ultra high net worth people of color in our communities. This could be its own presentation. It's just a huge problem that we're not going to be able to solve today. But I'm just positing two kind of problems that we have with ratings, right? One, they're often based on real estate. And real estate is problematic because it's inflated and it excludes a lot of people. And two, we have a lot of other information at our fingertips. So I think a good way to look at ratings is that they're just one of many scores, that they're fallible, that they're very useful, but that often we need a lot more information when we're putting them out there. So Kelly's just going to talk briefly about our capacity ratings and the things that her and her team have done to mitigate this somewhat.
Great. Thanks, Jess. So as Jess said, we have a long way to go before we can address a more equitable assessment of philanthropy among people of color and other marginalized groups. But we've started to address how we might acknowledge some of those truths that we know suggest somebody has capacity, but we can't prove it through public records. So I've created some non-monetary rating buckets in our system. And the first one that is active right now is the international high net worth. And as you know, it's really difficult to find public wealth information for people outside of the United States. So what we did was developed a set of criteria to acknowledge that these are people that have a high net worth. And we did focus on high net worth because we don't feel confident that we can assess who's middle class country to country. So a lot of the very respectable professionals of countries we're not including, like doctors, engineers. They might have high net worth. They might be a mid-range prospect, but I don't have enough information to assess that without something there. But we can look for executive titles, people that own companies, people that are connected to known family wealth. And so that's where we have the high net worth in the title to be really clear. And what that allows us to do is basically just set a go flag for the fundraisers. This person is worth your time, your energy, your resources to qualify. Now what we're doing is seeing if we can apply those same concepts to domestic prospects. And as Jess kind of pointed out, not only is our real estate inflated, but we have a lot of young alumni with high paying positions, executive level at some of these tech companies that are kind of influencing the high real estate value. But a lot of these young alumni don't have public assets of their own yet. Same with children of our principal giving prospects. A lot of them, we know they're going to inherit this wealth. Obviously, if we know they're estranged, they don't count. You don't just get to be the child of a rich person. But this is something that we're looking at applying as well. Again, looking at this just as a go flag, a yes, no. Is this worth my time? Yes, no. It doesn't allow us to offer the nuance of which fundraiser we might suggest it to based on their level, but it does allow some discovery work to happen. One area, while I have not launched it yet because I'm still working out what that criteria would actually be that is easily understandable by everyone and makes sense, doesn't start to get squishy so everybody becomes a potential prospect. But I've discovered another area where this is helpful is for the organizations that are non-direct funders. So like the, I can't remember exactly what it's called, the Science Philanthropy Alliance. They're a prospect that we have to do all the steps that we would with any other prospect, but ultimately we can't rate them because they're kind of matchmaking us with the person who will give the eventual money. So I would like to acknowledge them as well. And what that's gotten me thinking is, how can I take, if I'm already developing this framework, how can I expand it to include things like they're a part of a giving club and whatever else I can look at as indicators for major gift work. This is, like I said, we got a long way to go here. So if any of you have ideas, please do reach out to me. I would love to talk more about this. We also made some changes to our multiplier when we are assessing home value. We tested out quite a few different scenarios against our known donors, and I wouldn't say we found a perfect system. So again, if you want to talk about this with me, give me a call offline. But what we did decide on is adjusting the home value. So, you know, it's a multiplier of only 2% of the estimated wealth if it's under $1 million. We also consider age. So while we have this set of young alumni that we know have a lot of wealth but aren't publicly, at least they're not buying assets in their name that we can find, we also have ones that are buying homes, but we recognize they're young. They're still building wealth. They're still building family in some cases. So we adjust the multiplier to take care of that. So again, we'll just take a really quick look at the types of ratings that we do. They are pretty simple. They're a 5-year estimate of philanthropic capacity to any cause. We don't take affinity and inclination into account. We also don't do peer ratings or planned giving ratings. We have a quick rating, which is either a verification or just a literal quick rating. That's something that was generally done in 15 minutes or less. It's usually a single source rating, and that's just to get them in a bucket and get moving. Then we have our capacity rating, which is the more in-depth traditional digging into all of the assets and choosing from a variety of formulas that make sense. We only have one gift officer rating, and that is for campaigns. We started that at the beginning of our last campaign to bring some more clarity and accuracy to what the gift officers thought they would receive from a prospect during the campaign. So they would use our capacity rating as a guide, and then they would say, okay, what do I think I'm going to get? This was really valuable at the beginning of the campaign. As you can imagine, every single unit had a certain very prominent Northwest tech founder who now runs a very large foundation on their prospect list. And, you know, if you just use the capacity rating, nobody's getting that full capacity. And so it created these like bonkers UW.
You get $100 million. You get $100 million.
Right. So we use these capacity ratings to bring some clarity. Okay, what do you think you're going to ask for? What do you think you would get out of this? And so that was great for campaign planning, especially at a UW level. It also was really helpful for the relationship managers, since we are an open cultivation office. The relationship manager could see all of the campaign ratings and go, okay, now I understand how each unit is planning to work with my very important prospect. As just said, we also load the unverified ratings into the system. They are clearly labeled as such. And in fact, when you receive those on any reports, it'll say a rating, and then it will say, parentheses, verified or unverified. So again, the fundraiser knows exactly what's going on. That's how I broke it out here: created by humans, created by machines. Our other created by machines is something that we are working on right now, and that's something we're calling an adjusted unit capacity rating. So this is taking the idea of the campaign ratings that the gift officers do, which I think we'll still have them do, but the first pass will be our analytics team is working on developing an automated score that will take other scores into account, and giving, RFM, I can't even remember, because even if I said it, we're still developing it and testing it. It will probably change, but it will create an adjusted capacity to say, okay, if this person has the capacity to give $100,000, what does it seem likely that they're going to give to this unit? So it would be on the unit level. And where this will help is all of the, for all the prospects, when we did the campaign ratings, they really just, the gift officers focused on their top 100 prospects. Now that we're having small campaigns all the time. So like you want to build a building for something. Now we can get some idea and build a campaign gift table based on something a little more real for all those prospects that, a fundraiser has no idea yet. And I did see somebody's question briefly. We did review them. I wouldn't say we validated them. We had a whole lot of zeros, which again is part of the reason where we're
the campaign ratings. Yeah. No, we didn't. We thought we might compare them. Like, what if they came in way above the capacity rating? At first, I think we were reviewing those, right? And then we were like, what's the point? We have, if the gift officer thinks they can get that much,
right? And
go for it.
Clear, it was a separate rating. So it wasn't, the capacity rating was still the capacity rating. So we didn't feel like it was troublesome. So if their campaign rating was hugely over what a capacity rating is, that happens sometimes just because public records can't prove a higher capacity rating. We've all done ratings where we're like, I think there's more there, but I can't prove it. So that the campaign rating kind of adjusted for that. And again, this is where we're starting to use these scores together. So in the future, when all this is working, we'll have a capacity rating, then we'll have an adjusted unit capacity rating. What do we think this person might give to your unit? And then we'll have that gift officer capacity rating, which would come after qualification, after, we're doing things on a certain set of information that is available to us. They will include their own set of information that they'll get through the conversations.
Yep. Are there more questions about capacity ratings, or should we barrel forward? What do we think?
Because we got a lot.
I know we got a lot. We got a dramatic change of events here where the king is losing his crown because we're inviting his friends to the party and they're all going to be there to help provide context for the ratings. And so what do I mean by context, right? You might be saying, who is this king that you've chosen for your slide deck? And, I might then add a picture of Paul Revere or the Revolutionary War or the Boston Tea Party, and then maybe perhaps most fabulously, a scene from Hamilton the musical. And then you might say, oh, I get it. It's King George III, who was King of England during the Revolutionary War. So, just similarly, all of ratings friends, all the other analytic scores that you have at your disposal can help provide context in the same way. So Kelly and I are going to shift from talking about capacity ratings to kind of talking more about all of those other cool scores.
Yeah, and to be clear, as Jess mentioned, we have an analytics team, and so we are not developing these ourselves. We are the client, basically, of analytics. So we work very closely to define our needs, to test it, and to launch them, really. So any questions about how we literally do things to calculate these? You can send them to us and we will connect you, or we will get answers for you later. But
with the fabulous Baron Cato, who some of you may know, he's an APRA board member and he's amazing. He builds all the scores.
So this is just a quick kind of reminder 101 to know your score types. It is, I think, really important to remember when you're talking to fundraisers as well, to reinforce, like, we have descriptive scores, things that describe behaviors and things that have already happened. We have predictive scores, what we think might happen based on the things that have happened. And then we have prescriptive scores, which is really suggesting, okay, we know all these things. Now this is what we think will happen next. To be honest, we are not doing any prescriptive scores. We know that there are some of our peers that are working on this, and we're really excited to see how this evolves. But for the most part, you'll find these kinds of scores in the retail world and the
Non-philanthropy.
Yeah. I pulled a screenshot of one of our self-service reports that we're able to use, our fundraisers are able to use, and it's, what do you call this thing?
You put a population in and it spits out.
Yes, it spits out all the information for you. So people use it to pull mailing lists and get more details. You'll see we have a scores tab where you have all of the scores available to them right now. And we did try and include in the labels whether something was descriptive or not. This was a reminder that we just moved the ratings into this area recently, and so I should make sure that that has that descriptive label on there. But I want to point out one of the reasons why we were able to successfully launch unverified ratings, which I can't remember if I mentioned, but that was 2018. So it's relatively recently. And one of the reasons why it didn't create this big, a lot of anxiety is because we rebranded them as being one of many scores. By this point, our fundraisers were really used to the concept of predictive scores and descriptive scores. And we just kind of reminded them that calculating rating either by machine or by a human is collecting multiple points of data and summarizing it in one single score. And with the unverified ratings, I talked about kind of the matching success, and the fundraisers are largely really comfortable with the idea of likelihood from the model, the major gift model scores, that they understood that as a first pass. They thought it was reasonable that if we're just getting them kind of close to a bucket and most of the time that's going to be correct, they were cool. So scores, one of many. Also a reminder that some of your scores, you should note whether they are being calculated on a record level, so it's on a person or an org, or if they're at a group level. You've got your marketing clusters, your census tracts, stuff like that. You can buy this kind of group level household net worth demographic data from the vendors. When we talk about your constituency as a household, that's a record level. What we do for our capacity ratings and for our others is we do try and calculate based on the household a couple, because that's how most people give, is as a couple. We have the individual scores, but we mainly report on them. And so there's a calculation that is done to decide which of the household members best represents their overall score.
Yep. So I think one thing to keep in mind here is that there's lots of fancy stuff being done in industry and maybe even at other peer APRA organizations, but whatever you can do at your organization, even if it seems clunky, is still going to be revolutionary. So keep the Model T in mind, right? It looks ridiculous now, it looks clunky, it looks primitive, but at the time it was super revolutionary. So anything you can do to kind of get started, making sure your scores are being seen and used all the time is going to be a huge boost to your effectiveness and efficiency as a group. So I'm going to go over the UW scores now, not because we think they're the best, but just to give context to the next section where we talk about using the scores. So I'm not going to do great detail on here, but we have put some detail in here, and so that you can get the slide deck and see kind of more information if you're interested. So first, of course, we have an RFM score. I'm sure most of you also have an RFM score at UW. Ours tops out at $5,000. So it's not really perfect for pinpointing major gift donors, because a person who gives $1 million and a person who gives $5,000 both get the maximum score amount for monetary. And that's just, it was built for things other than major gifts. So we have a lot of little handouts that we've made about our scores to remind both us and the fundraisers about why, how the scores are built. So I've put a little screenshot in there. I'm not going to go over that for every score that I'm listing. Second, of course, we have likelihood scores. We have many major gift likelihood scores, some for UW-wide, some for specific units. We also have a bequest likelihood score. All these, I think, are very common. Engagement, we all use this word differently. So at UW, the way we use engagement is, it is a score that is really mostly used by our alumni association group. It really de-emphasizes giving. You can see here that it's only 10 out of the total points. So it's much more about how involved is somebody at UW. But again, it's a score of 1 to 5 describing their engagement. Still useful if a fundraiser is thinking about who to call. We have a giving velocity. It describes somebody's giving trend over 5 years, whether it's up or down, again, 1 through 5 scale. And lastly, we have a major gift affinity score. This is one that Kelly and I designed and built just for major gifts. And it combines RFM and engagement with like how often are they being contacted and having personal visits with the unit. It's calculated for every unit and it recalculates every night. And it is the closest thing we have to a prospect stage. We don't do prospect stages at UW because we're so big and decentralized. So this is a way for the business school to look and say, for the business school, how close is this prospect in affinity to me? And the gift officer can have a very real and quick influence on this by meeting with the person, right? So they can see quickly the affinity growing from discovery to investment if they make a major gift, if they serve on a board for your unit, and if they take visits with you. So that was my extremely fast description of our scores, because what we really want to get into is talking about how we put our scores to work.
Yeah, so it's been a journey and we're gonna take you on that journey, including showing you our campaign pyramid report as an example of not putting your scores to work. This was our original campaign pyramid back in 2010, I think it was. So it was revolutionary at the time because it was interactive. You have your campaign ratings, so it was also revolutionary because it was based on campaign ratings, not just the capacity ratings. And then if you clicked on a ratings band, it would show you all the people in that. But there's really no context. You can calculate what might happen in a perfect world, but you have no idea if those are good prospects, close prospects, etc. So next, we're getting a little better. Here is the gold zone prospects. Again, this was early campaign. We had just done our first major gift model score. So this was the first attempt. This is capacity ratings plus the major gift likelihood score. And we color coded to help people focus. So anything in the gold zone is good.
Yeah, and we like to come up with like little silly branding names like that because it makes things more memorable. It is funny to look back at this though and see that it's not the correct purple and gold. It like makes me twitchy.
Another part of our branding is the next slide. We have the purple people, and I'd say as silly as some of these names are, a lot of them were born out of people just naturally, like they were organic. Somebody just started calling it this, and then we were just like, all right, we're officially calling it the purple people. And here we're looking at, you've got unit campaign ratings on the left there, and now we're overlaying the affinity. At this time, this was again, very early campaign. We only had 4 stages of affinity, and it was manually calculated by all the researchers. As you can imagine, these things did not get updated very quickly. We would, at quarterly meetings, when the prospect management team is getting fundraiser updates and for their proposals and their portfolio, research would also attend and try to furiously listen for, should we move this person from discovery to awareness? It's why we have an automated score now. But this was great to help people focus. Again, purple, if you were anywhere in the purple, you were good. And if you were in that gold zone, you're the best. And the redacted sections were people's last names that you could click on and get a little more information about them. But weirdly, when you look at like the usage of reports, the campaign pyramid was used way more than this one. And we think it's because it totaled the dollars.
Yeah.
And people were always just looking at it. Like, I don't think they were using the report much. They were just clicking on it to get that dollar number or there. But certainly we used it a lot with one-on-one, especially the CAOs, the chief advancement officers of each unit, to kind of see how their units were working, how their whole overall plans were going. So this is more modern. This is a Tableau report that I created when shortly after I became director about 5 years ago. This is a self-service report for the fundraisers and the prospect development team, basically anyone with prospect rights, to go in and look at a prospect pool for each unit. And you can see really clearly how many prospects you have by rating band. And this is capacity rating now, not campaign rating. And by affinity. And it is really a tool for discovery, not for prescription, but we did include some filters on the right so people could start to segment and look at, I want to see all of my, highly rated people who are unassigned and have really high major gift model scores. So it's a way to go like, who might I look at next? Or who might I decide I need to review and maybe disqualify.
Yeah, or as a chief advancement officer, who does my team have in portfolios, and who are they leaving out? Speaking of portfolios, here's another one that's more of a sad face report. This is like for a whole team. We don't use it anymore, but it was each fundraiser gets a bar, and the bar is their whole core portfolio, which for us is like your active portfolio. And then there was this orange bar portion that showed who was rated too low based on your metrics. And this one caused so much strife. And I think it's because it lacked context, right? So you see like that first fundraiser, I don't know if you can read the numbers, they're so small, but that first fundraiser there has 69 prospects and 4 of them are rated too low. But is there a good reason that they're in their portfolio? Perhaps, right? Maybe they're, maybe the capacity rating, they just don't have very many visible assets and we were unable to increase their rating. Maybe they're being asked for a planned gift that isn't represented there. Who knows, right? And so is this important really without additional context about how good of a prospect it is? Not really. So I was pretty glad when we retired that one.
Here's some examples. Really
oh yeah.
Have about 10 more minutes.
Thank you. Here's another one that is showing all the portfolios for a unit by major gift likelihood. So again, it's just one piece of information. Now here we can compare two different units and see that the museum on the right has more prospects that are highly scoring in major gift likelihood than the medicine department on the left, but it still is not giving you much going on here. Now I'm not a pie chart hater like some people are, but again, pie charts are a little bit hard to encode more than one piece of information. So here we have a little bit later of an example where somebody is showing the same group of prospects twice, once in each pie chart, once by model score and once by affinity to the unit. And it's fine, but you can't see the overlap of model score and affinity together, right? So I think, oh yeah.
I just saw a question since you're talking about portfolios. Somebody asked what a core portfolio means.
Right, so it's just for us, it's their active portfolio. It was a way for us to help people shrink their portfolios while still allowing them to carry a bunch of like community volunteers outside their core. But the core is where they get evaluated for their metrics. So if we're going to say, you're expected to contact 75% of your portfolio, what we mean is your core portfolio. And the fundraisers get to choose who's in their core. Here's an example, I think, that shows two pieces of information really cleanly and in a really obvious way. It's just one person's portfolio. You've got a bar for each ratings group, and there's stacked colors showing affinity. I think there's a lot of things there's very little that you can't do with the stacked bar chart. It's just very powerful, right? It's very easy to throw additional information on a stacked bar chart. Here's another example of a stacked bar chart that someone on our team made. This one has tons of information. It's got RFM, major gift model score, and capacity rating, all combined together. This one was a director of philanthropy was asking us, I have 3 major gift officers. I want to know how to divide up the beats. In this case, it was natural sciences. Should I give chemistry and physics to the same person, or should I split them up? I want every gift officer to have access to, let's say, 400 prospects, but I also want it to be balanced in terms of how many of them are good prospects. So this is one of our researchers responding to that and saying, look, I think you should break them up this way, because even though the second fundraiser has access to more prospects, they've got about the same number of really warm prospects when I look at RFM for your unit and affinity to your unit. And she did the color coding based on warmth and coldness, which I thought was pretty good.
And I want to point out that this is done in Excel. This is a lot of the work that the individual researchers and prospect management strategists do in Excel. So it's not just Tableau reports.
Yep. Another one that I think is actually just literally like bubbles made in PowerPoint, because we tried to do it in Tableau and it was like packing the bubbles together in a way that made it hard to understand. But here's a nice way to encode a bunch of information too. This was the corporate foundation team asking us, let's take a look at the unassigned org prospects and see how many of them are high and low affinity or high and low capacity. And you can see here there are 160 unassigned org prospects that are high affinity and high capacity. So it's a nice way to show like, hey, there's some great potential here, and it's very easy to see.
So here's an example of not a flashy visualization. This was another researcher's product that she delivered, knowing that her fundraiser, who asked her to recommend some prospects to remove from their portfolio so they could make room for better ones and acknowledge that there's just some stale stuff going on. And the researcher knew that this fundraiser in particular, their eyes would just glaze over as soon as they saw a spreadsheet. They'd see charts and they're like, I don't understand what I'm seeing. So she did the same work. She looked at capacity, last contact, major gift likelihood, and giving to the units, pulled out the cream of that crop, for the cream being the worst in this case, did some manual research, dug a little deeper on those, and then created just a simple table, making sure to really concisely indicate what it was. So this works. You don't need to have big, fancy, flashy diagrams if you don't need. Another example of something that we just launched was this new leads tool. This is a Tableau report that was built for the research team. This is not external facing for the fundraisers, but the research team was doing a lot of manual work, and we had this clunky Access database where we were trying to pull different scores to try and find, we've decided we have enough of these scores that are kind of summarizing behavior. We want to find the people whose behavior is changing like right now. So this tool allows them to choose their unit. There's a couple other filters here that allow for some nuance about a 3-year giving total minimum, whether you want to exclude the football tickets from this data set, and then it gives you an output which includes RFM, velocity, affinity, model gift score. We did test some whether we could make this prescriptive by saying you must have a velocity of this and a RFM of that, and we couldn't get there. I think in the future we'll ask our analytics team to see if they can do it, but from a manual process, it couldn't get.
Yeah, it really differs from unit to unit, right? If you're talking about nursing versus, a giant medicine department, there's a very different threshold.
So the last thing I wanted to mention here is we've talked a lot about how to identify, prioritize people from a large group of a population, but combining these scores works really well in presenting a really quick view of a person or an org at an individual level. So this is a snapshot, a piece of our prospect profile that spits out some giving scores and summary data and some fundraiser engagement. And it allows you to choose your unit so you can compare your unit against the giving. It's just easier to just pull out rather than bury it in a narrative, which we also have a narrative attached there. Real quickly, you know, we train people whenever we launch a new score. We do an extensive amount of training. We do it in person. We make the documentation. We collect it all. Here's a snapshot of our intranet site with some call outs of, you know, how they can find more information. Another thing I would recommend is finding your ambassadors. So the people that really understand data and how to use it. Training them first, showing them first, and they will evangelize to others. Next slide, Jess. And then again, here's our model scores at a glance. Jess mentioned earlier, we have documentation for each score. Here's a one sheet of just, and actually it's a two sheet, but so people can refer to this really quickly. We also have documentation that's more technical in nature that we use and our IM team uses so that we all have the information we need to keep updating these scores and knowing what they're doing. You'll also notice that we did make an intention of making all the scores that we could like a 0 to 5 so that there was some consistency of understanding. So the fundraisers didn't have to remember if one meant something else in a different aspect. So.
I could go over what's next. I think maybe these could speak for themselves and we could do more questions. I think we're kind of coming up against the hour. What do you think, Joanna?
Yeah, I think this is some really good content here. So if people don't have too many questions, we can go into it. I would like to just give a couple housekeeping notifications and then we can either go through a couple questions or dive into this. I really appreciate the journey that you've taken us through, and I love kind of seeing the progression over the years and even getting the right colors to match your university. It's always the small things, right? So again, we have a little bit more. We have about seven more minutes and would love for you all to stay on with us. I did want to give a couple announcements from Upper Maryland. First of all, this free programming is possible because of our sponsors. So because of the COVID response, we have made our programming for our webinars free this year. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our premier sponsors of Donor Search and Futurist, as well as our supporting partner of Pursuant. Additionally, we have several events coming out I just wanted to speak of really quickly. At 2 o'clock today, one of our Upper Maryland partners is having an event. If you want to go into a Q&A on virtual networking, I'll put the link in the chat. And then on October 7th, we have a Portfolio Management 101 webinar. And for those in Maryland, on October 14th and 15th, our chapter is speaking at the Maryland Nonprofits webinar at their conference. And then finally, we have our fall conference coming up. It is November 11th and 12th. It's 2 half days in the morning of November 11th, the afternoon of November 12th. We have 2 exciting keynote speakers. And if you want to check us out on social media, we're rolling out the announcements and putting out some clues, but we hope everyone can join us for that. With that, we have a survey and trying to get to know everyone. So if you can fill out the survey, that will be perfect. So those are the Upper Maryland announcements. And again, I just really appreciate you, Jessica and Kelly, for joining us. Our first question is, what CRM are you using?
We use Advance right now, and we are within the next year and a half converting to a Microsoft Dynamics platform, and we are using the vendor Foundation XRM to kind of build up over the top of that to make it advancement friendly. So if anybody is interested, the more people that are on this, the better news for us. So reach out.
And then for your verified and unverified ratings, how does that work for gift offers putting in too many of them and just kind of getting complicated? How do you guys manage that? Or you were talking about funding for a campaign versus a building and just a lot of different input. How do you manage that?
Well, for the campaign ratings, we're actually not loading any right now. We retired them with the big comprehensive campaign. And Advance doesn't allow the nuance that we want for these unit ratings, but we have designed the next CRM that will be able to apply campaign ratings to whatever initiative that they have.
I think the way we decided to do it in advance was just to put it in a field that only had one space per unit. So like they couldn't just say, I have 5 ratings for School of Medicine. Like it could just be one. And we locked it down so we were the only ones entering them. So if somebody else said, I don't think they're 50,000, I think they're 1 million, then we would say, well, you guys got to agree on which one before we would enter it.
Right. And for verified versus unverified, we do allow fundraisers have to have a rated prospect or a prospect rated at 25,000 or more. There's nuance based on what level of, what type of fundraiser you are. But we do allow them to use the unverified ratings. That we have invested a lot in plus delta training, which that philosophy says that really all a fundraiser needs is to get a prospect in a bucket to know that they are a major gift fundraiser or a major gift prospect. And then the less information from research, the better, because they should qualify and if naturally discover that information. So as long as they have that, that unverified in there, they're good to go. And in fact, we ask that we don't verify things until they've got a contact report that says that they've qualified.
Gotta love Plus Delta, because I think we've all been saying that for years, right? But it's nice for a fundraiser training program to come out and back us up.
So Isabel had the question on making sure fundraisers are proficient and not confused by all those scores and ratings. So really that's what your response is just to simplify it, right? And have that bucket mentality.
Yeah, and Kelly did an amazing job working with the information. She won't toot her own horn here, so I'm going to do it for her. Working with our information management team to build an extract that calculates what's the best rating. So everybody has one best rating, and it's usually the verified rating. But if there's both verified and unverified, and if there's more than one verified, it looks for the most recent one, right? So it just comes up with one rating for them in all of the extracts and reports. Did I explain that right, Kelly?
Yeah, I'd say if the question was around, will fundraisers get confused by all the different types of ratings? No, yeah, that's how we solve that by really just promoting the one true rating, the one best rating. Mm-hmm. For training in general, I think what's helped us with fundraisers understanding, like starting to grasp what all these scores mean is, they were developed over time, one at a time. So we were able to get them comfortable with one. And then by the next time we could say, it was building on things. So each time they had a certain level of understanding. But we do retrainings, refreshers all the time. We do it by individual requests. We've gone and retrained whole teams. And I think that's the right thing to do. Because a lot of times somebody will hear something and go, oh, that makes sense, but they're not going to use it until a long time from now. So
I think that's why we also don't just put out lists that are like, look, here's everybody who's got a 75 in RFN, like without explaining what that means, like without highlighting the top 20 and saying, here's the best ones, or giving some sort of additional information.
All right, so I think we're about out of time. I know Jennifer had asked to go back to your velocity score slide, but actually I'd like to request that we send your slides and the recording to everyone, especially knowing we had some technical difficulties, that people can go back and take their time with it. Does that sound good to both of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's why we put that detail in there on the scores for sure.
Okay, great. And then people can also follow up with you. Do you mind if we send out your emails as well?
Do it.
Go ahead.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much again for sharing with us. We are at that 2 o'clock mark. So Jessica and Kelly, appreciate this journey you've taken us on with King George, and I hope you stay dry out in the Northwest.
Thank you
so much. Thanks for having us. This is really fun.
Take care.
Bye.